Thank you very much. And first of all, speaking about legislation after lunch, it's such a challenge. Please forgive me. So I will try to be as simple and interesting as I can. So there are two legislation that I think it's important to take in account. The Marrakech Treaty and the European so-called Accessibility Act. I think these two legislation set a completely different scenario. You as publisher or developer or website producer should consider this as a threat or as opportunity. I really suggest you to consider an opportunity because you will be able to offer your product and service to a wider community, and from the data that we gather in the Italian market, people with visual disability are strong readers. So I think you will have surprise on that. And also because the quality of the service or product you offer, following this accessibility rule, will have a higher quality. I'm sure that this is one of the most important points. The Marrakech Treaty has been, it came in force in September 2016. In September 2017, the European Commission adopted a directive, and all European member states should have implemented in their national law by October of last year. I don't think all the countries have done, but I think they will do quite soon. The Marrakech Treaty set a set of exceptions to the copyright rules so that print disabled user and organizations serving them, the so-called Authorized Identity, can create accessible version without asking permission to rights holder. And the special organization can also distribute and make available the accessible version also cross-border. So not only in their country, but to other organizations in different countries. The beneficiary are blind people, but also other people who have difficulties in accessing the print version of a book. For example, people who are unable to turn the page, or people having reading disability like dyslexic people. So the exception is wider than what normally was in the national legislation so far. The accessible version can be created creating and doing only the acts that are necessary to create an accessible version, and to create an accessible version that can be suitable to the different needs of different beneficiaries. So the accessible version can be braille, large print, ebooks, audiobooks, and also radio broadcast. It's not only book, but it's also digital, it's audio content and so on. It's important, and it's important also, we, for example, in Italy, are trying to involve publisher in this legislation as well, because the work done by the authorized entity could be easier if there is a collaboration between the publisher and the authorized entity, especially, for example, providing the file of the source book where they can start instead of starting from scanning the paper book. The authorized entity have some rules also. I don't want to read all of them, the slide will be available, but they need to be trusted. So the publisher, I think, will benefit on working with them because they can produce more title and also optimize the quantity of title, avoiding duplication of production of title that are already available in accessible version. The second legislation, I think, is complementary with this one and has been approved very recently because it has been approved on April 17 of this year and has been published on the official journal of the European Commission on the 7th of June. The idea of this legislation is to set the ecosystem to avoid to create the possibility to create accessible product and services, improving the quantity of title in the book market that can be created accessible, and setting common rules to all the European countries. So fragmented rules that are now available can impede, for example, the exchange of the distribution of a title in one country because the rules are different from another one. So setting the same rule for all the European countries should create a bigger market for all the people involved in the production of product and service. The adoption and publication in national legislation should be by June 2022, and the directive will enter in force for product and service in the market from June 2025. It seems a long time, but if you have to change your production process or you have to revise your website, I think you need to start now, because there is some time you need to fulfill all the requirements that are seen in the law. Among the other product and services, the directive covers a lot of other things like banking system, transportation, information on transportation, and so on. There are e-book readers that are considered a product, e-book and dedicated software, and e-commerce, that I think are the most important thing for us in this room. The beneficiary are wider than the one of Marrakech Treaty because include the same definition, but also people who has functional limitations such as elderly people, pregnant women, person traveling with luggage. I think some of these don't rely to publish industry, but I think it's important to take in consideration that if you produce an accessible title, that title can be used by more people than you think. If you think of elderly people who have difficulties in reading small character, if you provide a good accessible book, they will benefit as well. The impact of the publishing ecosystem is for all of us will be involved in that, because the accessibility requirement must be met by publisher, distributor and online retailers, e-commerce site, online platform, hardware and software reading solution, DRM, and metadata. And the directive should also apply to all mobile solution. And each actor is very clearly written in the directive, should be responsible of what its part. So no one can say it's not for me. And there is also a kind of control between the different actors in the value chain. And the directive should also apply to product produced and in other countries outside Europe and sold in Europe. So it will be a really wide law. The directive clearly states that a design for all approach should be followed. That in our word means born accessible publication. And there are some mandatory requirements. I won't go in detail because Avnish will go in more detail later. And there are some exceptions. One is the case of comics, art book, and picture book for children that are not completely out of the law, but they are required to comply with the accessibility requirement they can at the moment of the publication. So maybe they can only have some of the requirement. They are not completely out of the request. So the idea is what is really required is to create an emerging paradigm of an accessible publishing ecosystem where every actor of the value chain has its own role and its own activity to perform. The only exemptions that are clearly stated in the directive are micro-enterprise. That means organization with less than 10 employees or less than 2 million turnover, But also for this organization is stated that member states should encourage to adapt to the legislation and may provide guidelines and tools. So I think this is also something that government should think how to solve. And the other two option is if there is a disproportionate burden and there is a fundamental alteration of the product. It's quite complicated because you should really demonstrate that you have a disproportionate burden, and if you want to stick to this definition, you have to inform the authorities. So, and then you can be asked to demonstrate what it means, and the disproportionate burden should be demonstrated in relationship with the benefit of the end user. So it's quite complicated. And the fundamental alteration of the project, I think, is more for, not for books. It could be for some kind of books, but it's more for other kind of products and services included in the directive. It will not be considered lack of time, lack of knowledge, and non-priority consideration of accessibility. So I think this is quite clear. The requirement, there are some requirements already available in the directive, especially there is an annex where there are specific requirements for the e-book and for the e-commerce. Just a specification, e-books are considered as services because they consider all the actors, are not considered as a product, while e-readers are considered as the devices are considered as a product. It may be possible that the Commission require to send or to another standard organization to define harmonized European standard. If there is, we think, an agreement among all the actors in the value chain, we can avoid this providing the already existing standard in the market, because what they want to adopt is not to invent the wheel and create new standard, but the idea is to create standards that are already available on the market. And I think that the work we have done in this recent year with all the organizations, DAISY, W3C, IDPF, EDRLab, and all the other involved, it's a very good starting point, and we have already all we need to demonstrate that we don't need to redo another standard or to reinvent the wheel. We also have standard in the metadata sector, so I don't think, if we work together, I think this will not be required. There are enforcement and surveillance requirement that should be done by member state, but the Commission will also organize a working group where all the representative or stakeholder and industry will be involved to verify the implementation of the law. Just an example, what we have done as Fondazione LIA, we already have a ecosystem that is fully accessible. You need to take in consideration on the production all the workflow. So you have the production that should be accessible. Then you have the check-in phase that could be verified internally or externally. And this is the second part. And then you have the metadata part. And this is what normally is the role of the publisher. The publisher should be able to fulfill this part, and then the other one should take in consideration what is already done by the publisher and, for example, display the metadata in a proper way on their website, on the retailer store, on the library landing page. The metadata journey, it's another very important point, because right now, for example, our experience is we provide the metadata, but some of the retailers don't display them, and this, for the Accessibility Act, won't be possible, and user must be able to know if a title is accessible and must be able to know which are the functionality of the title, the feature of the title that fits for its need. So this is very important one. And so we must avoid the broken telephone game. We must be able to work together and to find solution taking in consideration all the possible issue. We try to describe them. It will be a paper that will be available soon. And try to find solution in a collaborative way. We will have an event in Milano on the 25th of October where we will try to discuss this issue, so you are all welcome to participate. Thank you very much.
Are there questions about the legal issues in Europe before we move to standards?
This is all very, very important for content producers that already have produced many numbers of EPUBs in the past. Do these? How is back catalog applied?
It's applied to new title. So then, if you can also work on the oldest one, but the legislation from the product and service from the date of implementation. You're sure? Are you sure? It's from that date. We check. We will check with the Commission. But I suggest that it's important to have as many titles as possible. So.